Namaskar. I've always been curious about whether there is a life after death. I've believed for quite a long time that, as taught in our philosophy, that the mind, when the mind leaves the body, it can't really experience anything. It's kind of suspended. It needs the physical body and the brain and the nerves in order to express itself and to have experiences. But recently I've read a couple of discourses by our master, Shrii Shrii Anandamurti, which suggest that the mind does have some kind of experience after death. So in just a week or a couple of weeks ago, we looked at a discourse where it said that the mind after death is engaged in search, intensely searching for the right conditions in which it can be reborn. And today's discourse is looking at the concept of heaven. And to my surprise, it states that, yes, one can go to heaven, so to speak, after death. But there is a catch. Sooner or later, you will have to come back to your human life again. So heaven it only exists it's only a temporary state, and therefore it's not something that we should aim at. It's not the ultimate goal. So here's the discourse, and it's taken from a discourse called The Minimum Qualifications for a Sadhaka, and that's in Vacana, mrtam, part 4. What is salvation? People use words like moksha, salvation, and mukti, liberation, very casually. Some say moksha, some say nirvana, some say mahanirvana, some mahaparinirvana. But what does it all mean? There are various kinds of bondages on each level of human society: linguistic, social, economic, etc. Mukti, or liberation, means the state of liberation from all these bondages. When one attains liberation of a permanent nature, it is called vimukti, or moksha, or salvation. If one attains liberation without all the reactive momenta, that means your past karma, being exhausted, one will have to return after a brief visit to the other world. But after exhausting one's acquired samskaras, the karma that you acquired in your life, one imbibes, that is, collects or acquires, a new set of samskaras. In a long life, a person both acquires virtue and commits sin. One who acquires virtue enjoys the fruits thereof in the supramental level. That is what is called heaven or svarga. There is no separate world named heaven or svarga. When one's virtue is exhausted, when the requital of one's acquired samskaras is over, one is born on earth to serve the unrequited samskaras. And according to the nature of the samskaras imbibed means acquired, one may be reborn as a dog, or one may also get a human life. Heaven is the stage between the two lives lived as human beings. No one acquires heaven permanently because no one acquires infinite virtue. That is a mere figment of imagination. A person who does virtuous deeds in order to reach heaven never becomes immortal, can never attain salvation. One who performs good deeds, one who is charitable, acquires virtue and enjoys the bliss of virtue in the life after death. Thereafter, In order to requite the unserved or base sanskaras, one is reborn as a human being, or even as an animal. What is gained by all that? Where there is no desire for the attainment of heavenly pleasure, where there is no other consideration except elevation to the level of Paramapurusha, human beings attain liberation. That is, people become one with Paramapurusha by the grace of Paramapurusha. Brahmavid Brahmaeva Bhavati. One who realizes Brahma becomes Brahma. This self-knowledge, this attainment of Brahma within one's own self, this unification of the two entities is the path of attaining salvation. So it begins by explaining what is mukti, what is liberation. It means the state of liberation from all bondages, different types of bondages. Linguistic, I can only speak a certain language. There are social bondages, there are economic bondages, all these kind of bondages. When one is totally liberated from these, that is mukti. But if you still have some sanskaras, and you have to, your mind may be liberated, but you still have some sanskaras that you have to account for, then after your state of liberation, you have to come back and serve those sanskaras. If one attains liberation without all the reactive momenta being exhausted, one will have to return after a brief visit to the other world. What is heaven? In a long life, a person both acquires virtue and commits sin. One who acquires virtue enjoys the fruits of that virtue in the supramental level. So our mind has different levels, and the supramental level is a very high level of the mind. So it appears that after death, we experience some kind of bliss on that high level of the mind. But that bliss will last only to the level of the virtue that we have acquired. So we have acquired a certain amount of virtue and we enjoy a certain amount of bliss. But when we burn through those samskaras, then we have to come back. When one's virtue is exhausted, means finished, when the requital of one's sanskaras is over, one is born on earth to serve the unrequited sanskaras. So it seems like heaven is this kind of experience of a very blissed out state on a high level of the mind for a temporary period. Heaven is the stage between the two lives lived as human beings. No one acquires heaven permanently because no one acquires infinite virtue, right? So heaven is just a kind of like a temporary reward for a limited amount of virtue. So what is gained? Do we gain anything by aiming at heaven, which, many people, if you grew up in a Christian tradition or some other religions, your goal, you are taught that the goal of life is to get to heaven. A person who does virtuous deeds in order to reach heaven never becomes immortal, can never attain salvation. One who performs good deeds, one who is charitable, acquires virtue and enjoys the bliss of virtue in the life after death. But after that, they have to come back and be reborn as a human being or even as an animal. So what do you gain in the end? Nothing, except a temporary enjoyment. So what is the actual path then to salvation? Salvation of a permanent nature, where there is no desire for the attainment of heavenly pleasure, where there is no other consideration except elevation to the level elevating oneself to the level of Paramapurusha, then human beings attain liberation. That is, they become one with Paramapurusha by the grace of Paramapurusha. So that is the path that, we are aiming at permanent and total liberation or salvation, not a blissful state of a temporary nature. So that was interesting and new information for me, and I hope you found that information useful for yourself as well. And I hope it makes it clear what we should be aiming at if we want absolute and permanent salvation. Thank you for watching. Have a good week.